Hello there, welcome to HFY Sci-Fi Galaxy, where humans face the unknown, outsmart the impossible, and turn every test into victory. So sit back and let the story begin.
The restraints were too tight. That was the first thing Dara noticed, not the cold, not the strange chemical smell in the air, not the sound of the heavy door sealing behind her with a pressure lock that clicked 7 times. The restraints, magnetic cuffs locked around her wrists, were sized for a being with wider forearms than hers. They kept sliding down toward her hands. Poorly fitted. That was a gap worth remembering. They walked her down a corridor that curved slightly to the left. Artificial gravity, then. Rotating section. The floor had minor vibration running through it every 4 seconds. She counted. For seconds, exactly. Some kind of mechanical cycle. She filed that away, too. The guard walking behind her was insectoid, 4 arms, compound eyes, clicking mandibles. It had not said a single word since pulling her out of the transport pod. The one in front was the same species. Different height, different stride. They did not talk to each other either. Bored, then. Routine to them. That was good. She had a cut above her left eye from when they had grabbed her on the rig. The blood had dried. It pulled at her skin when she moved her brow. She stopped doing that. The corridor opened into a processing room. Bright lights. A desk. Behind the desk sat a being she had not seen before. Tall, scaled, with a long flat face and pale yellow eyes that moved independently of each other. It was wearing a dark uniform with a single stripe on the collar. Not military, administrative. It looked at her the way someone looks at a box they have to file. Human, it said. Its translator device buzzed the word out in flat standard. Daracole, unauthorized entry into Containment Zone 7. Resisting Galactic Authority officers. Charged under Section 12 of the Outer Reach Codes. Dara said nothing. You will be held in Vault Omicron pending review. It looked up at her then, both eyes swinging toward her at once. There is no review schedule. She already knew that. When they had processed her on the transport ship, she had heard 2 officers talking in the corridor outside her cell. They thought she was asleep. She had not been asleep since they took her. The scaled being, Warden Seth, she would learn the name later, leaned back slightly. This facility has held beings 3 times your size. It has held beings who can dissolve metal with their skin and others who can survive vacuum. None of them have left. It paused. I mention this not as a threat, simply as a fact. I understand, Doris said. Her voice was steady. She was good at steady. They took her to a cell in the lower block. The walls were dark gray, compressed mineral composite. She recognized the texture from drilling reports. Dense. Hard. The door was a solid slab with no handle on the inside. The ventilation slot was near the ceiling, about 30 centimeters wide and angled, so you could not see what was behind it. There was another being in the cell, already. It was large, sitting on the floor against the far wall with its knees pulled to its chest. Its skin looked like pale stone, rough, ridged, the color of old concrete. It was breathing slowly. It did not look up when she came in. The door sealed behind her. 7 clicks again. Dara stood in the middle of the cell for a moment. Then she sat down on the floor, cross-legged, and began looking at everything carefully. The walls, the ceiling, the ventilation slot, the seam where the floor met the wall on the left side. There was a faint discoloration there, slightly darker than the rest. Moisture, maybe, or a mineral reaction. Either way, the composition was different there. Weaker, possibly. She looked at the slot near the ceiling for a long time. The airflow was coming from the right side of it, which meant the source was to the right, which meant there was space behind the right wall, not just solid rock. She did not allow herself to feel excited. Excitement made people sloppy. The large being against the wall finally moved, just its head turning slightly. One I looked at her. She nodded at it. I'm Dara, she said. That IT did not respond. It looked at her for a few more seconds, then looked away. That was fine. She was not in a hurry. She spent the rest of that first day memorizing everything she could see. The guard rotation outside. She could hear the footsteps through the door. The timing of the ventilation cycle. The way the light in the cell shifted slightly when something moved in the corridor, which meant the door was not perfectly sealed at the top edge. Minor. But there'd be by the time the lights dimmed for the sleep cycle, she had a list in her head. Not a plan yet, just observations. You did not build a plan from nothing. You built it from data, and data took time. She lay down on the hard floor and stared at the ceiling. The warden thought she was a box to file. The guards thought she was too small to worry about. The prison was built for beings that eventually stopped trying. Dara Cole had spent 11 years on a deep-sea methane rig where the pressure could crush a hull and the cold could kill a person in 4 minutes flat. Every single day on that rig was a problem that needed solving before it solved you. She closed her eyes. All right, she thought. So this is the problem. Let's figure out how to solve it. 3 weeks passed. Nobody came to review her case. Dara had expected that. She used the time the way she used every quiet stretch on the rig. She worked. Not with her hands. Not yet. With her eyes and her ears and the part of her brain that had been trained to find the thing most likely to kill you before it had the chance. She learned the guard rotation by sound. The insectoid guards clicked faintly when they walked, a natural sound from their leg joints, not something they could control. The one with the slightly longer stride came past her door every 40 minutes. The shorter one every 35. They did not coordinate. There was a 5-minute gap that opened up between them twice in every 2-hour cycle. Predictable. Useful. She learned the meal schedule. Food came 3 times in each light cycle, delivered through a slot at the bottom of the door. She ate everything, even when it tasted like wet concrete. She needed her body working. She also began saving a small amount of her meal tray's mineral residue each time, the dried salt-like compound that clung to the edges of the container. She scraped it off with her thumbnail and kept it pressed into a crease in the seam of her shirt. She did not know exactly what she would need it for yet, but she knew it was a compound that reacted with moisture. That fact had been filed in her head on day one, that the large cellmate, she still did not know its name, had started to watch her, not aggressively, more like something waking up slowly from a long sleep. It would turn its heavy head and follow her movements as she paced the cell. She had started pacing on day 4, 12 steps from wall to wall, turning at each end. She kept count. It also helped her feel the floor for vibration differences. On the left side, near the discolored seam, the vibration was slightly different. The substrate beneath was hollow, or close to it, but on day 18, the large being spoke. "You pace the same path every time," it said. The translator on its collar, standard issue, rendered its voice as low and slow. "But you're not just walking." "No," Doris said. She kept pacing. "I'm measuring." A long silence. Then, "My name is Algra." She stopped. She looked at it. Him, she decided, based on the way he had said his own name, something in the tone. "Dara," she said. Then she went back to pacing. He watched her for a while longer. Then he looked away. But he did not go back to staring at the floor. On day 21, Dara traded her first service. A prisoner 2 cells down had a problem. The translated word for it came out as pressure pain in her ear, delivered through the wall via tapping code that a 3rd prisoner had taught her on day 12. The source was the sleeping platform, which had a structural edge that pressed against a nerve cluster in the other being's lower body. Dara tapped back a solution, fold the meal tray liner, a thin, flexible sheet, and place it along the edge as cushioning. 3 taps came back. That meant gratitude. 2 days later, that prisoner tapped her a gift of information. The maintenance shaft in the lower corridor behind the recycling unit. It had been sealed during original construction, but the seal was not reinforced. The original work crew had flagged it for a follow-up inspection. The inspection never happened. This was known among the older prisoners because one of them had been there long enough to have spoken to a guard who worked during the construction period. Dara read that information very carefully in her mind, several times. Then she tapped back 2 beats. "Understood," she told Algra that evening. He listened without interrupting. "You want to leave?" he said. It was not a question. "I want to solve the problem," she said. "Leaving is part of it." "No one has ever left," he said. Flat. Not hopeless. Just a fact, the way you state something you have accepted completely. "That's because they stopped looking," she said. She sat down near him. "Not too close. Do you know why the sedatives in the food don't work on me?" He turned to look at her slowly. "They put sedatives in the food?" Trace amounts. Enough to make most beings feel heavy and slow without noticing why. She held up a finger. Human metabolism runs faster. We burn through it before it builds up. I've been completely clear-headed since day 3. Albert was quiet for a moment. All this time, he said, the others were half asleep. Yes. He looked at the wall. His rough, stone-colored hands rested on his knees. He breathed slowly. Then he said, very quietly, I've been here 9 years. Dara nodded. She did not say she was sorry. That felt like the wrong thing. Instead, she said, I think I found a way out. But I'm not leaving alone. Olga turned to look at her fully for the first time. Both eyes focused, awake. She met his gaze and held it. Outside, the guard with the longer stride clicked past the door. 40-minute rotation. Right on time. Dara noted it and said nothing. Day 28. Dara had everything she needed except time. The plan had 3 pieces. First, weaken the sealed shaft behind the recycling unit. Second, create a distraction loud enough to cover the noise of breaking through. Third, move without being seen during the gap in the guard rotation. Every piece depended on the others. She had been running the sequence in her head every night before sleeping, checking it the way she used to check pressure seals on the rig. Every joint, every connection, every failure point. The first piece was already in motion. Over the past week, she had combined the mineral residue scraped from her meal trays with moisture pulled from the ventilation slot using a strip of fabric from the inner lining of her sleeve. The reaction was slow, exactly what she needed. Slow and quiet. The resulting compound was a mild acid vapor, not enough to harm a person standing near it, but enough to corrode the specific mineral composite used in the shaft seal, if applied over several days. She had placed the small wrapped bundle near the base of the recycling unit on one of the rare moments the lower corridor was clear during a lockdown drill. She did not tell Olga the details. Not because she did not trust him, because the less he knew about the chemistry, the less chance he had of accidentally giving something away. She told him only what he needed to do, and when he asked no questions. He simply nodded that on day 30, Administrator Doe arrived. She heard the name from Olga, who recognized the sound of the transport docking and the increased guard movement. Doe was a political official, not military, not law enforcement. He contracted the Galactic Authority for the use of this facility. He visited twice a standard year to review holding numbers and confirm that certain prisoners were still contained. Albers said this with the same flat voice he used for everything, but there was something underneath it. Not fear. Something older than fear. Doe walked the block with Warden Seth at his side. He was smaller than she expected. Thin, pale-skinned, with long fingers and a habit of clasping them in front of his chest as he walked. He stopped at cells and spoke to prisoners not to ask questions, but to remind them of their position. He liked the sound of his own authority. Dara had known people like that on the rig, the kind who mistook a title for competence. That he stopped at her cell, that he looked at her for a moment. His translator hummed. The human, he said, arrested for entry into a containment zone. That's what they wrote down, Dara said. His fingers tightened slightly against each other. He was not used to being answered. You understand you are here indefinitely. She looked at him, not angry, not afraid, just level. The way she looked at a pressure gauge that was reading wrong, steady and patient, and already thinking about the next step that he waited for her to react. She did not. After a moment, he moved on. She heard him speaking to Seth in a low tone as they walked. She could not make out the words. Officer Tova was standing near the far end of the corridor. She was young, if Dara was reading the species correctly, barely past training age. She had been watching Doe's inspection with a careful, contained expression. When Doe moved past her, she looked back at Dara's door for just a second longer than was necessary. Dara filed that away. That night, Albers spoke more than he had since his name. He told her his home planet was called Veth Moran. It was a quiet place. The people there had no military. They had no weapons more powerful than hand tools. The Galactic Authority had classified its subsurface mineral deposits as a priority resource and contracted a company to begin extraction. When the company arrived, Albra had organized his people to stand in the drilling sites. Peacefully, simply standing there, refusing to move. The company filed a disruption complaint. The authority arrived. Everyone else stepped aside when a uniform showed up. Albert did not that as oh they took him here. Dara listened to all of it without speaking. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Do you know if the mining started? She asked. I don't know, he said. I have not had news from outside in 4 years. She nodded. Then she said, 2 more days. The seal should be weak enough. He looked at her. And then we make noise in a controlled location, move during the gap, break through, and find the maintenance pod bay I believe is behind that shaft based on the construction routing marks I found on the inner wall surface 3 days ago. He was quiet for a second. You went into the lower corridor? During the lockdown drill last week. 11 seconds of clear sight line. That was enough. He stared at her. Not disbelief. Something more like slow wonder. You counted 11 seconds. I count everything, she said. It's habit. Outside, the ventilation cycled. For seconds, same as always. She had been right about that from day 1.2 more days. Day 32. The compound had done its work. Dara knew it before she saw it. The smell coming from the lower corridor during the morning guard shift had changed, a faint metallic sharpness that did not belong to the recycling unit's normal output. That was the sign. The mineral binder in the shaft seal had been breaking down for 6 days, slow and steady, and now the structural integrity was gone. What remained was surface tension and habit. The distraction came first. She had spent 2 days placing small fragments of her meal tray liner into the secondary ventilation return vents in the lower block, 2 of them at opposite ends of the corridor. The liner material was not supposed to be flammable, but it was not supposed to be compressed into a vent filter either. Compressed, it would restrict airflow enough to trigger the pressure alarm in the recycling system. The system would read it as a blockage fault. Standard response: automated lockdown drill. The guards would seal to their positions at the block entrance and wait for the all-clear from the system panel. That would take approximately 8 minutes. She needed 6 as she told Algra the signal. 3 slow taps on the wall between their section and the main corridor. When he heard that, he moved to the door. When the door released for the meal drop, which happened during the drill because the system ran meal delivery on its own automated loop, and it was never reprogrammed to account for lockdowns, he would push it open fast and hold it. He had the strength for that. She had seen him move the sleeping platform in their cell once, a solid block of composite material that would have taken 4 workers on the rig to lift. He had shifted it with 2 hands and set it down without noise. The drill started exactly as she had planned. The pressure alarm rang out, 3 sharp tones, and the guards moved to their positions at the block entrance. Dara heard the familiar shuffle of feet and the click of a shorter guard's joints moving faster than normal. Hurrying. Good point. 3 taps on the wall. The door released. Algra pushed it open, smooth and quiet. They moved. The lower corridor was empty. The recycling unit hummed loudly, covering the sound of their footsteps. The sealed shaft access was behind it, set into the wall at floor level. Dara crouched and looked at it. The seal surface was darkened and uneven, the binder compound visibly degraded along the lower edge where the vapor had concentrated. She looked at Algra and pointed to the lower right corner of the seal. He pressed both hands flat against the surface, fingers finding the edge seam. He pushed. Slow, steady, controlled. Not a sudden blow that would make noise, but a sustained force that built on the weakened structure. The seal gave with a low, grinding sound that lasted under 2 seconds. The ventilation hum covered it. The shaft opened, about a meter across, dark and angled downward at 15 degrees before leveling out. Dara went in first. She had a short piece of wire she had pulled from the underside of the ventilation slot cover. Not enough to be noticed missing, but enough to scratch the surface of the shaft walls as she moved, giving her tactile feedback on the material and direction. Standard practice on dark space rig crawlways. You always kept one hand on the wall. The shaft ran for about 20 meters before she saw what she was looking for out on the right wall. Pressed into the surface at regular intervals were routing marks, etched lines and geometric symbols used by construction teams to navigate interior passages. Standard engineering notation. She had red marks like these hundreds of times. They pointed forward and slightly right, with a pressure differential symbol she recognized as indicating a seal bay ahead. She moved faster. The shaft opened into a chamber. Old, dusty. The air was stale but breathable. Against the far wall sat a maintenance pod, a small single-use travel unit, maybe 4 meters long. The kind used for hull repairs and external inspection. It had not been touched in a long time. The control surface was dark. No power, but the emergency beacon housing was still intact. A separate power cell, sealed from the rest of the unit, designed to survive even complete system failure. She recognized the model. It was a Vethric Series 7, an old design, but she had worked with Vethric components on the rig during the early years. She knew its bypass sequence. She was already pulling the housing open when she heard it. Behind them, back through the shaft, the alarm changed pitch. Not the recycling fault tone. A different alarm. Lower, longer. Security breach. Bun had found the empty cells. She did not stop moving. She told herself, "You have the pod bay. You have the beacon. You have the knowledge. The only variable now is time. And time is just another problem to solve." She got the housing open. The cell was intact. She looked at the bypass contacts and began working. Back at the shaft entrance, Albert pressed himself against the wall and waited, listening. Deep in the prison, Warden Seth stood in front of 2 empty cells and said nothing for a long moment. Then, "That is not possible. Nothing can break that seal." Officer Tova stood near the back of the group. She looked at the floor. She said nothing. She did not mention what she had seen the day before. Dara's face when Doe had spoken to her, that flat calm that was not submission, not acceptance, but something else entirely. Something she had not been able to name at the time. She still could not name it, but she did not report it. The beacon bypass had 4 steps. Dara had done the first 2 in her head before she even finished opening the housing. Step 1 was isolating the power cell from the dead main circuit, straightforward, 1 contact pin removed. Step 2 was bridging the beacon transmitter directly to the cell output. That required pressing 2 contacts together that were not designed to touch, which meant holding them manually or finding something conductive to wedge between them. She looked around the chamber. Dark, dusty old. She pulled a thin metal reinforcement strip from the edge of the pod's exterior paneling. It was loose already, the adhesive long since dried out. She used it as the bridge. It held. Step 3 was frequency selection. The beacon had a dial, physical, mechanical, not dependent on the dead power system. She turned it away from the Galactic Authority emergency band, which could be suppressed remotely, and toward the civilian rescue frequency range. That band fed into the medical and disaster response network across the sector. Suppressing it would mean going dark on every hospital ship and rescue relay in a 12-system radius. The Authority would not do that over 2 escaped prisoners. The PR cost was too high. Step 4 was the data. This was the part she had added on day 31, after she found the routing terminal inside the maintenance shaft. The terminal was an old construction area unit, not connected to the main prison system, but it had been used during the build to log structural decisions, and it still contained cached administrative data that had been routed through it when the shaft was first connected to the facility network, including prisoner intake records, including authorization documents, including Administrator Doe's sign-off orders. She had read them on the terminal screen in the 30 seconds she had before she needed to move. She had memorized what she needed. Now, with the beacon transmitter active, she input the case numbers manually. 12 prisoners held with no trial date, no review, no legal process. Albra's number first, then the authorization code from Doe's order. The beacon would carry that data in its signal header. Anyone receiving it would get the file index alongside the distress call. She closed the housing. The beacon activated. A low hum filled the chamber, then steadied. Behind her, Albra's voice came through the shaft, quiet and controlled. They're in the lower corridor. 8 of them, moving fast. "Get in here," she said. He came through the shaft. Fast for his size. She had not known how fast until she watched him move through a tight space with calm efficiency. He straightened up in the chamber and looked at the pod. Then he looked at her. "I am too large," he said. She had already measured the pod's interior with her eyes. He was right by about 15 centimeters in shoulder width. The hatch would not seal with him inside in any natural position. She looked at the pod again. At him. At the hatch frame. She pulled the hatch's secondary pressure seal strip, a flexible gasket that ran around the inner edge of the frame, designed to be replaced during maintenance. Without it, the hatch would still close and latch, but the seal rating dropped from full vacuum to partial pressure tolerance. For a short transit, it would hold. Sit sideways, she said. Left shoulder forward, tuck your right arm across your body. He looked at her for a moment. Then he climbed and it was not comfortable. His knees were pressed against the forward panel, and his head was angled against the ceiling. She climbed in after him, sitting between his legs with her back against his chest, and pulled the hatch shut. The latch caught. Not perfectly. There was a faint hiss of air at the lower left corner of the frame. She pressed her foot against it. It slowed. She reached forward past Albra's knee and hit the pod's emergency release. The launch mechanism was purely mechanical, a compressed gas system that did not need the main power circuit. The pod design had always assumed complete power failure as its worst-case scenario. The chamber wall in front of them separated. Cold, dark space opened up. The pod fired. The acceleration was hard and brief, about 4 seconds of strong pressure before the gas charge exhausted, and they were in free drift. In the dark, in silence, except for the hiss at the hatch corner and the steady hum of the beacon. Dara pressed her foot harder against the corner. The hiss slowed further. Albra said nothing for a long time. Then, "Are we in space?" "Yes," she said. Another silence. "Are we going to survive this?" The beacon is broadcasting on a civilian frequency with administrative data attached. Anyone receiving it is legally required to respond under Sector Rescue Code 9. "Yes, we're going to survive it." He was quiet again. Then, in a tone so dry she almost missed it, "I am too large for this pod." She almost said something practical. Instead, for the first time in 32 days, she laughed. Short and tired, but reeled in the darkness of dead space. The little pod drifted outward. Its signal moved faster than it did, spreading across the sector in all directions, carrying 12 case numbers and 1 authorization code, and the name of the man who had signed the orders. The galaxy's most secure prison had a hole in it, and it had put that hole there itself the day it underestimated what was inside. 3 days in a drifting pod was not comfortable. Dara and Albra took turns pressing their foot against the leaking hatch corner. They slept in shifts. The pod had emergency ration blocks, tasteless, dense but enough. The air recycler was functional. The temperature was cold, but survivable. Dara had been colder on night shifts on the rig. On the second day, a response signal came back through the beacon. Short, professional, in standard language. Signal received, vessel en route, estimated contact in 31 hours. She told Algra that he nodded slowly. Then he said, "You counted the sedatives and the food on day 3. Day 2, she said. "I suspected on day 1. Confirmed on day 2. "And you counted the guard footsteps." "Yes." "And the ventilation cycle." "For seconds. From day 1. He was quiet for a moment. "My people," he said, "are not like this." "Not many people are," she said. It was not a boast, just a statement, delivered the same way she read a pressure gauge. Plainly, Commander Rail's ship was a mid-class authority response vessel. Clean, efficient, crewed with people who kept their faces professionally still when the pod was brought inside and the hatch opened. Rail himself was gray-skinned, wide-shouldered, with steady eyes that moved over both of them in one sweep and showed nothing. He gave them water first, then food, then a private room. He interviewed Dara on the morning of the 4th day. He sat across from her at a plain table with no recording devices that she could see, which meant the recording devices were small and well hidden. She did not mind that he asked her to walk him through it. She did, step by step. The restraints on day 1, the guard timing, the meal tray residue and the moisture and the vapor compound, the routing marks, the beacon bypass, the data from the construction terminal. He did not interrupt once. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment, looking at the table. Then he said, "We designed Vault Omicron assuming that prisoners would eventually accept their circumstances, that the environment would do the majority of the work." "I know," she said. That was the flaw. He looked at her. Most beings, given enough isolation, stop generating new ideas. The sedatives accelerated that. The food was engineered to reduce initiative without reducing basic function. The facility had a 96% success rate at permanent containment. 4% is a lot of people, she said. It is, he said, and something in his voice shifted slightly when he said it. She filed that away too. He looked at the data she had transmitted with the beacon. 12 names, 12 files, 12 cases with Doe's authorization signature, and no corresponding legal process. He had been reading them since the pod was recovered. She had seen the look on his face when she was first brought aboard. He had been expecting a rescue and received a criminal case instead. "Why did you transmit the case files?" he asked. "They were part of the problem," she said. "A problem is not fully solved if the thing that caused it is still in place." He looked at her for a long time. Then he stood up, which she took to mean the interview was over. At the door he stopped. "You could have just transmitted the distress signal," he said. "The case files were extra. Extra work is how you make sure the solution holds," she said. He left. The investigation moved fast, which she suspected was partly because the beacon had already spread the case numbers across 12 systems before anyone could respond to them. Administrator Doe was placed under formal review within 48 hours. The other 11 prisoners identified in the transmitted files had their cases opened for re-examination. Officer Tova submitted a formal witness statement 3 days after the pod was recovered, describing the conditions of the lower block and the nature of Doe's inspections. Her statement was detailed and steady. Albrecht was told his case was under review on the 5th day. A junior officer came to tell him in the room they had given him, small, plain, with a window that looked out at open space. He was sitting at the window when the officer delivered the news. He did not move for a long time afterward. Dara came to check on him that evening. She sat near him, not talking, just present. After a while he said, "Why did you come back for me?" "You were part of the problem I was solving," she said. He looked at her sideways. "That is a strange thing to say." "I know," she said, "but it's also true." He nodded slowly. Outside the window, stars moved past, slow and uncountable. Dara had given one short interview to an authority documentation officer. Name, occupation, account of events. She had no interest in saying more than that. She was not a story. She was an engineer who had been presented with a problem and had solved it the way she always solved problems, by paying close attention, moving carefully, and refusing to accept that anything was permanent. The transport home was arranged for the following week. She spent the remaining days quietly. She slept well for the first time in 35 days. She ate properly. She sat with Algra in the evenings, and they did not always talk on the last night before departure. She took out the small notebook she had been keeping since day one in the cell, a thin piece of compressed packing material folded and refolded, written on in the dark with a wire tip she had shaped for the purpose. Measurements, timing notes, a rough sketch of the shaft routing marks, guard intervals, the molecular formula for the acid compound, written from memory. She looked at it for a while. Then she closed it and put it in her pocket. Outside, the stars were the same stars that had been there the whole time. They did not care what had happened. They did not know. The galaxy was large and mostly not paying attention, which was fine. Dara Cole had never needed anyone to be paying attention. She just needed a problem and enough time to look at it clearly. The galaxy had given her both.